Seconded by Councillor Wilkinson. If I can speak to that as well, I'm in favor of it as well. I think we have a ever-evolving community, and particularly the Mexican migrant workers are a crucial part of one facet. I also feel that we need to show the inclusivity, the exact word that came to my mind when I was first asked about this, excuse me. But also, I think a number of us went to the session that OGVG held last year talking about how to make our guest workers more inclusive. And I remember I stood up and said, I think it's time that we as leaders show how to be inclusive. Sometimes it's difficult for our residents to accept the fact that we're never changing municipality. Sometimes they like to go back to the way things were in the 70s. Well, we aren't the 70s anymore. We have become a very multicultural community, and I think for us to embrace an aspect of culture in our community that has become crucial to not only our population, but also to our economic development component. And I see this as putting out the hand of friendship. And I agree too that we do need to look at the policy as a whole. I have always felt that we were, unlike a lot of communities in our county, when we would not fly the Francophone flag. And it bothered me very much because, again, that's another crucial part of our community. And I look forward to having this discussion in 2 weeks. So I agree with you. But this opportunity presented itself, and I thought that we needed to look at it separately, that it is not the same as many of the other groups that want to fly the flag in our community. These are actually 1/3 of our residents that live here a good portion of the year, and I think we need to recognize them and hold them slightly apart from different agencies that want proclamations. So with that, I will also support it. And if there are no other comments or questions, did you have a comment, Councillor Thiessen?
Just a quick comment. When I first came in tonight, I thought too that because of our policy that we were maybe going to go down the slope that I didn't want to go down, but I think after Mr. Neufield's comments, it is very focused, and it is a country that is very important to this community, absolutely. And it's a recognized country that's asking to fly this flag. So I'm going to change my mind and be in favor of this, and I am looking forward to our discussions on the new bylaw on that matter. Thank you.
With that, all in favor? Unanimous. And that's carried. Thank you very much. We look forward to both of the
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you very much.
both of the festivals. Looking forward to the music, the food, and the general festivities. So we'll see you 14th and 15th. Thank you, gentlemen. So we're going to move forward on the Stormwater Master Drainage Study for the Reed, Silver Creek, and Big Creek watersheds. If you gentlemen don't want to stay and listen to this part of our meeting, we certainly understand. Welcome, Mr. Michaud, Mr. Jubenville. Nice to see you, Alan. Alex, it's yours.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The recommendation before you this evening is that Council receive and approve the Leamington Stormwater Master Drainage Study for the Reed Drain, Silver Creek, and Big Creek watersheds, prepared by Stantec Consulting Limited, for the purpose of planning, design of development proposals within the municipality of Leamington, and that Council approve an additional $25,450 to Stantec Consulting for creation of the two-zone policy. Stormwater management in Leamington and Essex County is a primary function of diligent, responsible development. The flat topography and soil conditions within Leamington are such that any changes to drainage patterns and/or volumes can cause flooding, erosion and sediment of drains. With the introduction and continued construction of greenhouse-style farming, the volume of runoff in certain areas of Leamington is continually increasing. These increases in runoff from Leamington properties have the potential to impact drainage systems in Leamington and the neighboring towns of Lakeshore and Kingsville. Given that the area of Mercy Road 6 and along the Highway 77 corridor is becoming a greenhouse cluster, The municipality and developers have a responsibility to also manage the drainage system that provides service between the greenhouse properties, Lake St. Clair, and Lake Erie. Council awarded an assignment to Stantec Consulting to address an immediate need to study the Silver Creek, Reed, and Big Creek drainage systems in order to provide a report with recommendations for allowable release rates, building elevations. The study provides a stormwater management plan for the study area shown in Figure 1 of this report. The recommendations of the study will minimize or, where possible, prevent increase in contaminant loads, minimize changes in water balance and erosion, reduce risk to human health, safety, and property damage, maximize the extent and function of vegetative and pervious surfaces, and promote stormwater management best practices. Stantec proposed to complete the tasks of culvert and drain inventory necessary for modeling, topographic survey, hydrologic modeling. Hydrologic modeling generates the predicted rainfall, and hydraulic modeling provides performance characteristics of the drain. Erosion analysis as it relates to the recommended release rates for stormwater. Floodline mapping will provide the 1 in 100 year predicted flood elevations, which are used in design of structures. And the final report recommendations for allowable release rates at a lot scale or a concession scale. The original scope and intent was to build and calibrate a model using results defined by the 1981 IRCA floodline study for the former town of Bell River and townships of Maidstone and Rochester. By way of project meetings with the conservation authorities, the team learned that the Environment Canada data station at County Road 46 crossing of the Ruscombe River not only collected daily average levels and discharge data, but hourly as well. In the context of this type of model, this is a perfect or ideal scenario to build and calibrate a model. In order to use this new data, it was necessary to expand the study area into Kingsville and Lakeshore, and it is important to note that the construction of the model includes the collection of topographic data, drainage reports from 3 municipalities for all drains that connect to the Ruscombe River, weather data from past rain events, elevation and flow data in the Ruscombe River, land drainage data, whether it's tile drainage or what's the soil types. Modelers and engineers then take the data and put it into their software in such a way as to mimic the results of the real storm events. If the model results are close to the real data, statistically speaking, then confidence is gained to accept the model for future predictions. The study is now complete and is attached under separate cover for Council's review. Stantec used the following framework when preparing the study recommendations. Significant greenhouse development is proposed within the municipality of Leamington to accommodate the proposed large-scale developments and mitigate any adverse impacts to receiving watercourses, municipal drains. A holistic style stormwater management approach is required, one that elevates the impact of increased stormwater runoff volume at the watershed scale. The study recommends a 2-tiered allowable release rate. A lower tier release rate is to mitigate long-term erosion potential from increased runoff volume resulting from the development. An upper tier release rate is to provide secondary outflow during the infrequent storm events, thus reducing storage volume requirements and drawdown times. Flood control measures are recommended to a minimum standard equal to a 1 in 100 year return period. The municipality of Leamington provided the following proposed ultimate build-out limits for the proposed purposes of completing this study. The Big Creek watershed had a 25% build-out. The Reed Drain had a 75% build-out, and Silver Creek had a 50% build-out. Current build-out conditions have been accounted for in the floodline mapping, including sites constructed in 2018 under interim design criteria. The model calibration to observe data at the Ruscombe gauge was instrumental in adjusting the hydrologic response of the model to mimic actual conditions. For the purposes of the staff report, the study recommendations are summarized below. It is recommended that the full study be reviewed prior to applying these recommendations. For erosion control, a lower tier release rate is to be applied for all storms up to 1 in 5 year with a 4-hour Chicago distribution. The Silver Creek drain has a 2.5 liter per second per hectare. The Reed drain has a 2.9 liter per second per hectare, and the Big Creek drain has a 1.5 liter per second per hectare. For infrequent storms that exceed the 1 in 5 year minor lower tier storm An upper tier allowable release rate of 6.0 liters per second per hectare is recommended. Floodline elevations in the study provide a minimum standard for floodproofing elevations. However, building elevations must satisfy the minimum Conservation Authority waterproofing requirements with regards to minimum freeboard, which requires that the minimum lowest opening into all buildings be at least 0.3 meters above the floodline elevation or on the on-site calculated 1 in 100-year water storage elevation, whichever is greater. Storage requirements shall be based on the prescribed 1 in 100-year storm event. The site also be designed to contain the stress test event volume within the property and below the lowest building opening. The stress test event is herein proposed to be 150 millimeters as defined in the Windsor-Essex Region Stormwater Management Standards Manual. The design criteria in the study do not guarantee that the given site will never flood, but rather they provide mitigating measures to achieve a low risk of flooding. Where an individual site potential damages due to flooding are high, it is the practitioner's responsibility to design to a more conservative standard or to provide a significant emergency flow route in accordance with the proponent's site-specific needs. Flow restrictions, even those on private property, are accounted for with the understanding that the municipality acknowledges the responsibility to ensure that these existing ponds, as well as future ponds, are properly designed and function as designed. As such, the municipality must secure the legal right to inspect the pond, construction, enforce maintenance, or remedial works if required. Storm ponds are to be built as landforms, i.e. ponds shall not be raised above ground via dikes which could potentially fail. A two-zone floodway concept has been adopted for the study area. For all drains included in the floodline mapping, a minimum setback from top of bank of 8 meters plus depth of drain shall remain unobstructed and without fill placed within this setback to ensure that a significant floodway corridor is maintained. In addition, where designated on the floodline maps, temporary floodplain areas shall remain unobstructed without fill. Beyond the designated limits of the floodway corridor and temporary floodplain areas, the remaining area within the study limits are to be considered as a flood fringe, which is conditional development subject to meeting specified design criteria to the satisfaction of the municipality and the conservation authorities. The floodline model should be kept up to date as a living model that incorporates new development as it occurs. This would allow for evaluation of impacts from potential drainage, channel, floodplains improvements on a site-by-site basis. With the study complete, the next and final phases requires the creation of the two-zone floodplain policy. This public process will ensure that the recommendations of the master drainage study can be implemented through planning and development regulations, particularly planning and development regulations that Leamington and the two conservation authorities must abide by. Stantec Consulting will be retained to assist with the completion of the two-zone policy. Stantec will review the existing official plan and zoning bylaws together with the study and relevant provincial legislation. Draft the two-zone floodplain management policy. Prepare the necessary official plan and zoning bylaw amendments. Conduct one public open house to gather input from property owners, IRCA, and the Lower Thames Valley Conservation Authorities. Prepare the two-zone policy for adoption in the new official plan document, and prepare necessary zoning bylaw amendments for implementation. During the draft stage, the policy will be presented to both the conservation authorities for their acceptance. Upon council's approval of the final policy and official plan and zoning bylaw amendments, the municipality and both CAs will have an applicable document for planning and development reviews. It is the stance of the conservation authorities that without these stormwater regulations and guidelines, any future development in the study area will not be permitted. The cost of the study is to be funded through the $1,000 per acre fee for greenhouse developing in the study area. The total stormwater management fees collected up to and including August 6, 2019 is approximately $184,000. $119 collected in 2018 and $65,000 collected in 2019. Council has previously approved $190,000 for Stantec to complete the study. An additional $25,440 is requested to complete the two-zone policy. To date, Stantec Consulting has been paid a total amount, including all eligible taxes, of $179,184.77. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Council, questions, comments? Councillor Thiessen?
Sorry, Madam Mayor, sorry to interrupt. The author of the report is here with a short presentation.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Sorry.
Well, you'll have to hold that thought. Ellen, welcome.
Thank you, Your Worship and members of council. So Alex has summed it up pretty well, but I have a number of slides and I'll probably go through them fairly quickly. But there's some good visuals, I think, and maybe just a little bit more perspective on the study and the results and why we're doing the study. So just a brief agenda. Like I said, I'll talk a bit about the background of the study, the drainage system, the overall drainage system for those three watersheds, talk about flood control, the importance of flood control in this area, and summarize some other considerations that were recommendations as part of the study. So under background, I only have a couple slides here. One will show the study area and the other will discuss the objectives. So that slide you've already seen. You're likely familiar with the boundaries. We're talking about the entire north section of Leamington from the west to east limits and the northern limit at County Road 8. Just to add a bit of perspective, it's about 76 square kilometers of area and 162 kilometers of drain that we were looking at. So just to kind of add that to what Alex has already showed you in this figure. And we're looking at the Reed drain, the Silver Creek drain, and the Big Creek drain watersheds, which I believe you're familiar with at this time. In terms of our objectives, we were looking to provide consistent stormwater management design criteria for the development to proceed without adverse impacts to the watershed from an erosion and flood perspective. So that included an evaluation of the overall drainage system and its conveyance capacity to convey runoff, an evaluation of erosion potential from the increased runoff from development, as well as a determination of flood control levels based on minimum standards of acceptable risk. So the projected future development, to put in perspective, is about 30 square kilometers of land of that 76 square kilometers as greenhouse development. So it's a significant amount of future predicted greenhouse coverage, and it's a significant amount of increased runoff that comes as a result. So there's definitely a need to provide some controls, both on the flow controls coming off that site, as well as flood controls to ensure that those structures, those buildings are flood-proofed. So now I have a couple slides with the drainage system. One's just a very brief overview of the model approach, and then I quickly summarize the allowable rates. So this slide here is just a few snapshots that I wanted to share that gives a bit of sense of the hydrologic and the hydraulic model as Alex was speaking of. And hydrologic, just to provide another definition, is measuring how much of that rainfall is becoming runoff. In its undeveloped state as agricultural lands, much of that rainfall, or a good portion of that rainfall, will infiltrate, will sit on the lands, will slowly drain away through tile drainage. And that runoff is significantly increased when it's hard surface or greenhouse development that is quickly drained to a pond or to the drain. So when we say hydrologic, we're talking about measuring how much of that rainfall is becoming runoff. When we talk about hydraulic, we're measuring how high is the water level going to rise and how fast is that drainage system going to convey that runoff. So the study was at its core a hydrologic and hydraulic model. So we were looking at measuring the effects of this added development, and also measuring how can these agricultural drains, what can they handle? Because in the end, they are ultimately designed as agricultural drains for agricultural lands. So what you're looking at now is some screenshots. So on the top left, you see kind of a bird's eye view aerial photography, and you see kind of a corrugated steel pipe culvert for a driveway entrance. On the top right, what you see is a LiDAR point cloud, as they call it. And so LiDAR, without getting too specific, is light detection and ranging. It's essentially a plane that is flying and shooting pulses of light to the ground and measuring and then reflecting back, and that's measuring topography of the land. So with that LiDAR, and as of 2017, we have very sophisticated LiDAR and accuracies of 5 centimeters vertically. So we're talking about an accuracy of 5 centimeters plus or minus from that airplane shooting down to measure the actual elevation of the ground. That point cloud, you can see it's very dense. It's about 8 points per square meter. So, square meter, there's 8 points on average that airplane is shooting and picking up on for every square meter. And you can see that from kind of the aerial versus the LiDAR. You can see that it's capturing the road, it's capturing the drain with the purple and the blues. It's even capturing the trees with the red. It's capturing the branches. This was shot in April, so there's no leaves. It's actually hitting the branches and capturing the trees and the drains and everything in essence. On the bottom right, you see kind of a street view when you're looking at it from the street, and you can even see the drain, you can see the tree branches, you can even see that kind of that white shape, which is that circular culvert. So wanted to share those. It's really kind of painting or depicts the level of sophistication of the technology, and all that was brought into a very powerful model that's able to take that data and cut drain cross sections and of that entire 162 kilometers of drain within the 3 watersheds. So we were able to take that data, cut sections at every 100 meters, cut sections, introduce the culverts, and measure culvert elevations from those points that have picked up those culverts. And then we went out in the field to supplement and measure actual actual sizes, as well as the depth from the top of culvert to the invert. And between that field work and combined with the LiDAR, we were able to depict a very accurate picture of the existing drainage system in a very large watershed, which would have otherwise been very time-consuming and very costly to go on survey. The last slide, the bottom right, the bottom left is just showing a snapshot or depicting the radar for one particular event. So I think we had 5 events that we looked at. This was to calibrate our model to ensure that our model was accurately representing how rainfall is becoming runoff. So we looked at 5 actual storms. We utilized, again, some newer technologies and some fairly accurate radar, which is what you're seeing is kind of light blue is 1 inch rain, dark blue is 1 to 2 inches, and the green is 2 to 3 inches, and I believe that's the scale. But the point is not the numbers. It's more so to show that there's a variation across the watershed. So the Ruscombe gauge is, if you're able to see, it's sitting at the top of the kind of the left outline would be the Ruscombe watershed, which is some is inside the study area and some of it is outside the study area. But that's the entire drainage area within Leamington and Kingsville and Lakeshore that drain to that Ruscombe gauge. And that's the gauge measuring flows and levels. So with that gauge and real events and a pretty good understanding of how that rain varied over this very large catchment area, we were able to get some very good fits with our model and are very confident that our model is replicating the real world conditions out there. So in terms of the allowable release rates, I think Alex has already gone through this. All I'll add to that is, again, we had the lower tier rate, we had the upper tier rate, and the lower tier rate is controlling those frequent storms. And when I say frequent, it's on the high side, I'll say, as a 1 in 5 year, which is a 20% chance of occurring in any given year. And over recent years, you may have had some presentations here and heard discussions about return periods with the rains that we've had and flooding and whatnot. But that's a typical design storm for our minor system, or storm sewers, as we call minor systems. So it's a frequent storm, but it's not one that you would expect every year. So we're throttling those storms. So most of the storms is what I'm trying to say, to a lower threshold or a lower release rate, controlling those flows to a lower level so that that increased volume is slowly delivered to the drains to minimize the potential for erosion. The upper tier rate is to allow those less frequent storms, those bigger storms. Once we get into those bigger storms, that secondary outflow kicks in from the pond to allow water to move a little bit quicker. And because we're not necessarily at that point, those storms are infrequent. We're not concerned about that frequent release for an erosion potential at this point. We're wanting to get a little bit more water delivered to the drain. And of course, that 6 liter per second is controlling it to the capacity of that drainage system, the overall drainage system. So it's not necessarily one particular drain on one street. It's looking at the entire system holistically and saying and defining 6 liters per second hectare as the appropriate number. So in terms of flood control, I have about 8 slides here. They're mainly visuals and pictures, just again try to provide a little bit of perspective on the study, the results of the study. So this first one here is the undeveloped condition, and so this is on Highway 77 is showing the agricultural field on your right, and this is depicting what would be a fairly significant rain, so a major rain event that has exceeded the capacity of the drain, and that excess water would be sitting on the surface or be ponding. So it would look, something like this. So that would be under a major event. The drain is exceeded its capacity, and this is what you have as a short-term ponding situation, which typically speaking will be little to no damage. Again, it's what I'm describing as a temporary condition where that water is storing for a number of hours and slowly draining away as the storm subsided. So that would be your undeveloped condition. In a development phasing, that would be kind of where we're at now, as some of the developments are coming on, and as some of the developments are coming on, that's your worst case scenario at this stage, because what's happening is that under that major event, that storage that used to be, the water that used to be sitting in the field, kind of waiting to drain away with relatively little or no impact, is now being confined because you've replaced that with a greenhouse development. And so what we're looking at is, again, that narrowed floodway or that defined floodway, 8 meters plus the depth of the drain. And when you do that and you remove storage, you're seeing that water level increase, if I can go back. So as opposed to kind of spilling and spreading across the land, it's now confined to that floodway, and that water level is raised. And what we're showing on the right is a typical greenhouse, and purposely showing this condition, which I think is a typical one, where the road is higher than the finished floor. So we're talking about a flood control water level in the drain within that defined corridor. We're assuming that is the corridor and the water is within that corridor, and development has to, per floodproofing regulations from the conservation authorities, has to be a minimum of 0.3 meters above that, and oftentimes that may still be below the road. And that's part of the importance of this flood control, and why these elevations in the study was done, is because the buildings are not practically able, in many cases, or certainly in a good number of cases, are not able to be raised above the roadway, which would allow any major storms to run over land to a sufficient outlet, to a safe outlet. That water is going to be contained within that area. The roads are high, and any water that's spilling out of the drains is going to be contained within that area. In the fully developed condition now, as we move ahead and look ahead to where everything is developed, the condition actually improves, or it'll progressively improve to the point where under full development conditions, the water levels would actually come back to within the banks of the drain. And I say that the low bank of the drain, that would be the case. And that's a product of the controls being set in place to restrict the flow to the capacity of the drain. And that's what you're seeing here in this fully developed condition. What you have in kind of the current condition is that worst case interim condition where You have some areas that development that is controlling flows, but you still have a number of areas that are releasing uncontrolled. And while they're agricultural land use and they're not going to produce as much runoff as a greenhouse, under an uncontrolled condition, a major event such as a 1 in 100 year, as we refer to as our design standard, or a 1% chance of occurring in any given year, that particular storm event in an undeveloped condition will produce more flow into the drain than what we are controlling to. And so that's why you see the developed condition looking better. So this slide here is an example of one of the maps. There's a lot of different colors, and there's a legend showing kind of a grade of elevations, a half-meter range of elevations. It allows the user of the report and the map to get a general sense and lay of the land. And then along that, within that map, along all the drains, you have elevations at set points. And when you zoom in, this is right at the corner at Staples, at the corner of County Road 8 and Highway 77. And I picked this spot for two reasons. One, it's showing those points and those elevations. So that is the 100-year elevation. So that would be the flood control elevation, and buildings need to be finished grades at the buildings are to be a minimum of 0.3 meters above that elevation. So it's shown at various points, and here's a particular example, one of 5 areas within the study area where we've designated a temporary floodplain area. And the reason for that is we have locations, and the point right on the east side of 77 at the crossing as it comes across and then heads west along the Reed Drain, that water level there, 187.42, I'll point out, is just slightly below the edge of pavement of Highway 77. And so if we don't have that temporary floodplain area in there, the existing condition, the water level will be cresting across Highway 77, which we don't want. And so the temporary floodplain, that low-lying area where the water naturally it would be kind of sitting and storing now, it has to remain there until such a time that the development progresses and the water levels or the flows and subsequently the levels in the overall system start to come down. And of course, that evaluation is achieved through our recommendation for a living model, a model that's continually updated as the developments come in and the controls are put in, the levels will subside, and at some point, that's why we call it temporary, that land will be able to develop. It just can't, we're designated as one that can't go ahead and immediately or initially as part of the worst case scenario, the phasing as I discussed. So this slide here, just a general depiction of that floodway. Again, we're talking about the top of the bank plus 8 meters in depth of drain, and then outside of that floodway is the flood fringe, the conditional development as Alex pointed out, which is subject to meeting criteria of the conservation authorities. So this last slide here under flood control is one that I added just to add a bit of insight on risk versus return period. And if you're familiar with the 1 in 100 year and as that 100-year design standard, that is what is setting those elevation. That is what is determined provincially and through our CAs as the minimum acceptable level of risk. And that corresponds to a 1% chance of that storm occurring in any given year. And the misconception for some is that 1% is an absolute. And so you think of that risk as that this is a 1% risk and a very low risk. And so this clarification is to clarify that level of risk that is the standard. Which is to say it's 1% in any given year, but statistically speaking over time, after 2 years it's 2%, after 5 years it's 5%, after 10 years it's 10%, and then it's not necessarily linear. Over the long term it starts to come down a little bit. After over 25 years there's a 22% chance of a rainfall exceeding the levels that we've set as minimum standard, and going as far as 100 years we'd be looking at a 63%, more than 0.5% chance, better than a coin toss that event will be exceeded. So that is why we say that the minimum standard is a low level of risk. It's not no risk, and it's certainly not 1% over the long term. there's more risk. And that explains or provides some justification as to why the conservation authorities look for that 0.3 meter freeboard. Of course, the hydrology and the hydraulics we're talking about, none of that is certain. So there's a buffer, for the uncertainty, and there's certainly a buffer to provide a bit of additional risk mitigation. Right. So with that, the last point I wanted to touch on was the other considerations, just the one slide. Alex has already pointed out the first. I thought I'd mention it again. The ponds and the stormwater ponds facilities that are being put in, they're being put in on private property, but it's very important that they maintain their function and their effectiveness to control the water and so that water is not delivered to the drain. So that first point is important, that the municipality has to be able to inspect, enforce, and if required, go on to the private property to maintain the pond and make sure it's functioning as intended. The stormwater ponds to be built as landforms, again, as Alex mentioned, I'm just reiterating again as an important point. The flood lines that we've provided, the flood control elevations we provided, are typically, as per Ministry of Natural Resource Standards, they ignore stormwater ponds. And the reason they ignore them is because there's a potential for failure if they're built up in dikes. Now, as an exception in our region, we are allowing the consideration of the storm ponds to throttle the flows when we consider the elevations, but it's only because we are justifying that with the lands being flat and the ponds are being excavated from existing ground. So hence they're being built as landforms, and there's not dikes that are building above ground, which would be a potential for failure, in which case the pond would fail and a significant amount of water would be introduced to the drainage system. Winter conditions was touched on in the report, and there's an ice blockage potential that is not within the regulations, or a flood regulation, and it's not discussed in the study in terms of probabilities of ice jam and how that would impact flood lines, but it's certainly something to be cognizant of, and something that the practitioners and the proponents of these greenhouses need to be aware of, that as you're introducing this greenhouse development and you are using agricultural drains now as stormwater infrastructure, and you're doing so particularly as Highway 77, and as an example, that's snow plowing the highway, that's putting in, and then that snow is being plowed, and the characteristics of that are changing, and there's a freeze-thaw cycle that introduces a potential ice blockage, and there's a few recommendations within the report to how to deal with that, but that is definitely something that needs to be acknowledged, and something that's outside of the minimum flood control elevations that we've set in the study. And the last one, as we mentioned before, the model should be kept up to date, development proceeds, and that would allow, as you're adding development, and there was no set timeline on when it should be revisited, when the model or the flood elevations should be revisited and potentially lowered. But with that model up to date, there's also opportunities, and there's been discussions already with fellow consultants that are doing these greenhouse developments and applying the study into potentially there's potentials for optimization, maybe some improvements to channels, maybe perhaps even stormwater facilities. These kind of next steps could be built upon with an up-to-date model, and those discussions can happen in the years to come. So what we have now in the study is a baseline model of worst-case conditions, of course, with the existing drainage system as it currently stands. So with that, I'll open up to any questions.
Great, thanks, Alan, that was great. Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you for your report. It's a very good report, and I just have a question in one area. Page 33 of your report, you show 12 different properties that currently have flow rates about 10 times higher than what you're currently recommending at the 2 liters per second per hectare. Some of them are up to 20. Is that something that in the future, if the building permit is taken out, or that would be recommended change at that time? Or would you ask them to, I can't imagine you'd go out there and ask them to change their stormwater ponds at this point. This might be a question for Alex or somebody else, but
In terms of the, I mean, I could certainly, yeah, what you're seeing now is the pre-existing rates. And it clearly illustrates the lack of consistency and the calculations that were done perhaps with different approaches, and the hydrologic kind of analysis in itself is somewhat subjective, and you can have various parameters and get various results, and these were calculated, looking at an isolation and not with the benefit of a holistic study. So that being said, those were pre-existing rates that, as you say, it's not practical to go and ask them to retrofit, particularly in some of these sites where there's really no room for expanding a stormwater pond. I would presume that if things were to be redeveloped, they would follow the new standard, but I suppose I will defer to Alex on that if it would be any. It would be my assumption that if things were to redevelop and there was opportunity now with open land to put in a storm pond to the new criteria, that it would follow that.
and I don't want to put administration on the spot for right now, but that's just a consideration for the future, because I was surprised to see such a difference. First of all, from what you're recommending, but secondly, from some that are at 6, and then some are, or there's a couple of them here at 20, and I'm glad to see some consistency coming out of the report that you would recommend one level and they all stick at that, but just a comment.
Anyone else? Oh, yes, sorry, Deputy Mayor.
Yes, with the mayor. I guess, I'm not an engineer, but I was pretty well impressed with the report, and also saying if we build more, there'll be less problems. So I found that hard to believe, but can you enlighten me on that? So if we could,
Yeah,
build,
sure.
if we can build quicker, it'd be better.
Yeah, and thank you, by the way. And yeah, it's because we're throttling to those low rates, and I believe, I don't remember offhand, 20 was the highest. The next ones are maybe in the 10 or 11, 12 range, seems to be that range, and that would have been a previous standard of a 2-year pre-developed. And so that basis for that kind of long-standing practice was that the assumption that the municipal drain was designed for a 1 and 2 year return period. And so then those flow rates are derived from that. But they were done so often at the lot scale. So simply looking at what would that flow rate be for my particular lot, whereas sometimes the watersheds and those drains would have been designed for a much longer flow length or time of concentration as we calculate in hydrologic analysis, to say that it takes much longer for that flow to get across 1.2 kilometers versus the time it takes for it to get across, let's say, 200 meters of an individual lot. So those pre-developed calculations that were forming the basis of the controlled flow rate are higher than what you're seeing. What you're seeing now is the 6 liter per second is more in line with an agricultural drainage rate for what we have modeled, what we intuitively understood, and what we've modeled and replicated to be the case with our calibrated models, is that the tile drainage system is delivering a lot of that flow, and it's designed to a 3 to 6 liter per second per hectare flow rate based on the spacing and the size of the tiles. And while there's particular individual drains, such as Reed Drain, for instance, that may be able to handle a 10 or 12 liter per second per hectare flow rate, as you look at the entire watershed, there's other drains that can't handle that kind of flow. And what would happen in today's current undeveloped condition is you'd have water just sitting in the field and eventually draining away, and you likely wouldn't hear of it, or there wouldn't be any real damage to speak of. But as we add this greenhouse clusters, as Alex puts it, it certainly creates a potential issue. And so the control flow rate, sorry, Larry, back to your comment, the controlled flow rate is low. That's why it will fit within the low bank of the drainage system once everything was developed. It's over controlling, if you will, to some degree, back to the tile drainage capacity on its own, without any additional consideration to what would come off the surface under a larger event.
Thanks, and a further, I just figure if you dig the ditch deeper, that would help, but I guess it doesn't. And also, I know Councilor Jacobson and I said on the IRCA, we've questioned this report, when it was going to come due. When will this report come before Conservation Authority? Is this going to hold up any major development now because it hasn't been passed yet, or does this give the green light now to future developers that they can go now because we have a report that is on the shelf?
Currently, the conservation authorities are using this report for development reviews. We just kind of need to put a bow on it and wrap it up to kind of finalize everything. So the conservation authorities have been involved in the discussion from the beginning right up until now. So they've approved the report, they're using the report, and so we're forging ahead. We just need to kind of finalize the...
Councillor Jacobs.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just at Councillor Verbicki's, or Deputy Mayor Verbicki's question, I don't think I got a clear answer. The IRCA now is accepting that report and issuing permits, or are they waiting for a more defined until it's all signed, sealed, and delivered? I guess that's a $64 question there.
They're using this report as a basis for their review. So yes, they are reviewing developments as they come in based on the findings in the study for these drainage watersheds.
So
And
there's
approving them.
there's no delay in permits being issued
No,
currently under this report, correct?
no.
Thank you.
There are no further questions. Move the recommendation as complete there. Because it also talks about the funding for the next step. Great. Seconded by Councillor Thiessen. All in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Appreciate the in-depth education there on the drains and the...
Perhaps too much, but
No,
I can't
no.
always help myself.
No,
so.
that was great, Alan. Actually, I understood it as well, so that's
Okay, good.
good. Thank you
Thank you.
both. Okay, moving on to the purchase of wireless network equipment, and that's you, Mr. Del Ciencio.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Members of Council, bringing this report forward to purchase network equipment to tie into the fiber optics that are being installed throughout Seacliff Park, the Promenade, Rick Atkin Park, and the Kingsmill Ball Diamonds. We issued a request for proposal for this networking equipment, and it closed with 3 responses. Of the 3, 1 was incomplete and deemed not compliant. So for the other 2, we weighed them out and selected Applied Computer Solutions. We utilized the fiber optic master plan that was developed in 2018 that provided us locations for all this equipment, and we used that to issue the RFP. Because this project provides the opportunity to modernize service delivery for the municipality, this is another project that we may use for that grant funding later on. So, subject to council approval, administration will move forward with this purchase of this networking equipment and award the RFP to Applied Computer Solutions.
Thank you, Dave. Comments, questions, motion? Councillor Jacobs.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Dave, like on this network, is there going to be public access in these areas for this, or is this strictly for municipal business?
When we set out to install the fiber optics earlier this year, we issued enough capacity to utilize some of the fiber strictly for municipal purposes connecting to our facilities, but the other portion of the fiber is to provide this wireless internet access to the public in these areas. So Essentially, it's one cable of fiber coming down that we've split off to municipal or our corporate network and other strands of the fiber for use for the public and whatnot. So essentially, we're two separate networks, but we will provide free Wi-Fi, free internet access to the public.
So, maybe off the question here, but will this give us an opportunity to sell advertising on this and recoup costs, like, advertise restaurants, things to do within a municipality through that network? Because like right now, if you go to a public access one, all of a sudden an advertisement will pop up and, not for long, but anyway, go to Dave's for a barbecue or something.
So with the setup that we've done, I think the possibility may be there to look into that. Essentially, when we initially designed it, we wanted to design it similar to the Wi-Fi that we put out in all of our municipal buildings, where there is a legal disclaimer that you're accepting the terms and conditions to utilize this, but then, and then you've got that access. But I believe the back-end infrastructure, I mean, we'd have to verify this, but you can push out potential ads or whatnot. I think initially when we looked at it just to provide connectivity, so I didn't necessarily concentrate on that, but I do believe we have capabilities to look into that if asked to.
Just my thoughts as a potential revenue stream. Oh, Laura?
Council, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I guess on page 4, figure 3 there with around Rickacken Park and the promenade, is that going to allow the marina users on boats to get the signal?
So that signal will likely bleed over into the marina. We're still keeping the marina system that's in place now. So that is not going, that is a completely separate system. We wanted to segregate that traffic so that the marina had their own separate system. Because usually there's a high concentration of users, and for whatever reason, a lot of bandwidth being used by the boaters that are there. So we didn't want that network traffic to impede what we're providing everywhere else. However, we're going to try to reduce the power that we push out that signal, but I think some of it will bleed into the closest docks over there.
Councillor Wilkinson.
And Dave, in the future, if we want to push it out to other areas, let's say the pedestrian pier, if we get businesses out there, whatever, is this something that we can build upon and go to different areas with in the future?
So when we put fiber out in this area, we anticipated there might be some future growth. So we put in additional capacity within fiber strands. So we may have to just tie off to certain areas because you come in and then you rebranch off. But we do have capacity that, should there be a requirement down the road, we can tie into existing infrastructure that we've kind of laid out. So yes.
And with that, moved by Councillor Wilkinson, seconded by Councillor Jacobs, all in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Thanks, Dave. Moving on to the replacement of the utility tractor. Mr. Brown.
Thank you, and good evening, Mayor and members of Council. So Public Works utilizes 4 utility tractors for various tasks, including winter maintenance of sidewalks, mowing, maintaining baseball diamonds, beach grooming, spraying, and other general maintenance tasks. Recently, 2 of the tractors have broken down due to transmission failures. Unit 61 is a 2013 tractor with approximately 3,100 hours on it. And Unit 63 is a 2009 with a little over 6,200 hours on it. So upon investigation, it was determined that the transmission casings have rotted out near the cab mounts. So it's just one very specific location on both sides of the transmission. Both transmission casings have cracked there, and a large hole has developed in Unit 61, which allowed water and debris into the transmission. So due to the internal damage of the components, the transmission on 61 is not repairable and would need to be replaced at a cost of over $19,000. It is difficult to know the extent of internal damage to the transmission of 63. You can see in the next picture, the mechanics have it kind of split in half, but without, the transmission basically goes from the front of the cab to the rear of the cab, from back tire to back tire, so it's a fairly large unit. So without actually tearing the transmission apart, it is difficult to say what type of internal damage is in 63. If we assume that all the internal components are sound, we still have a cost of over $10,000 just to repair what we can see is wrong with it. If the internals are bad, then we would be looking at the $19,000 bill as well. So originally, the replacement of Unit 61 was targeted for 2022 in the 5-year capital plan, and 63 we would have been requesting for a replacement in the 2020 budget, so next year. As the expected cost to repair each tractor is likely worth more than the total current value, and both units, especially number 63, are at or near the end of their estimated useful life. Administration is recommending that the municipality purchase replacement tractors for both units, 61 and 63. As part of the budget, 2019 budget, we did have the approval to purchase basically a similar utility tractor, which we tendered out, and the council approved us to purchase it in April of this year. So what we're recommending is that we would just use that same tender submission to basically change the quantity of the ones ordered and replace Unit 61 and 63 as well. Each one per that tender, each tractor was valued at $43,900. And just if you recall, and maybe you don't, we had 6 submissions for that tender, and there was only one that was compliant. So if the one other note we'd like to make is if the municipality places the order now, the tractors will hopefully arrive this fall and be available for winter sidewalk maintenance demand. So, and as we've seen for some of the reports this evening, our municipality seems to be growing. So that was really the request for that April additional tractor, was just the additional sidewalks that we have taken on. So yeah, with saying all that, the recommendation is that the purchase of 2 2019 John Deere utility tractors in the amount of $87,800 plus HSD from McGrail Farm Equipment be approved, and that the fleet and equipment reserve be used to fund the purchase. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. I know there's another councillor up here that doesn't have that color. Why did you choose that color? If the previous ones lucked out. I know it's a, but...
Yeah. Well, okay, so basically when it goes out to tender, like I say, we did submit out a specification, and it's an open tender, so we get submissions from many different dealerships. John Deere tractors, so far the only ones that have the minimum horsepower that we need for our implements, with also the physical size that we need, because we need a narrower tractor in order to fit down the sidewalks. We did have to purchase one bigger one, like a next size bigger, to pull the batwing mower, and that one won't fit down the sidewalks. So it's basically, that's why many of the previously tender that we did, many of them were disqualified because of the size and the horsepower issue.
Thank you.
Councillor Hammond.
Your Worship, thank you. Ken, from looking at the pictures, I don't think we have much choice. But just to my question, what do you do with this equipment now? Is it something you put back in the back and use it for parts in the event that, I'm sure that a lot of John Deere parts are interchangeable. Is that what you do, or is there a trade-in value for this?
Through you, Mayor, because this has all happened so recent, we have asked for a trade-in value from McGrail's. So we're going to wait to see what their trade-in value be, because quite often we'll put it on like gov deals, like an internet auctioning site, and we've been getting very good success with our old assets. Our fear is that not many people are going to want to purchase this tractor off gov deals that doesn't have transmissions once they realize what the cost of a transmission is. So as we do have other similar tractors, that is one thought, is that we'll either trade it in if we get a good value for it, or we'll keep it for parts, because we do have right now 2 other tractors, and if this are approved, then we would have 4 very similar tractors, and we would probably be able to use quite a few of their parts.
Councillor Thiessen?
Thanks, Madam Mayor. So Ken, the issue that you're having with both of these, it seems like that's a problem with that model tractor. Have they done anything to change that? Or is there some preventative maintenance that we can do? Or is there some sort of filler you can put in there so the water and the salt and everything else doesn't sit into that corner?
Through you, Mayor, that is a very good question. So we actually brought in the other tractor, number 62, and looked, because it is a very specific spot where you can see this kind of elliptical corrosion. The rest of the transmissions are aluminum, which I think is fairly common in the industry now. So it's very localized. So number 62 so far hasn't cracked, but it does show the signs of corrosion. So we may look at replacing those boots. Like it's actually like a boot that comes out of the transmission. It's part of the casing, and it is replaceable on unit 62, because it's a 2013 as well, to extend its life. But yeah, we're going to definitely be keeping an eye on it now that we've seen this. This is the first time this has come up, and it's very coincidental that it happened within weeks of each other. But yeah, we're basically going to keep an eye on it, and yeah.
Okay. And just one more question or comment. So what you're saying is that the John Deere tractors are the only ones that make the tractor that you need narrow enough to fit down our sidewalks. So we need wider sidewalks so we can buy more economical tractors.
And maybe even red ones.
That wider sidewalk comment might come back to haunt you, Councillor Thiessen. We're all making a note of it, and that's in the minutes too, I believe. With that, sorry, Councillor Jacobs.
Oh, thank you, Madam Mayor. With that, you're talking about the damage is mainly caused from snow removal with these, Ken? Is that...
That's what we're suspecting, is the corrosion from the salt. The location is kind of tucked underneath the cab, behind the tires. We do wash them down quite vigorously when we can, but even the mechanics say after they've been washed down, we bring them in for repairs. Often their hands still get salt on them, even though we've washed them down. There's always just seems to be salt residue on these things, and with the aluminum housings, I think it just corrodes quicker. But that's what we're suspecting the issue is. It's from the salt, and these tractors see a lot of salt.
Okay, and I'm sure they have dual purposes other than pushing snow with these things, but has any consideration been given to just buying specific vehicles or snow removal vehicles, something like with a blowers on them that would, because we're expanding all the time with the amount of sidewalks that we have and so forth, and it seems to me there would be less stress on these vehicles because they're really not pushing, they're just going to be, running a blower and blowing them out. Maybe for consideration in that particular area. I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah, no, that's actually a very good question as well. There is another piece of equipment out there that a lot of larger tier or counties like London, if you go to London, you'll see these big sidewalk machines that they have. Some people refer to them as trackless, and they're kind of made for sidewalk clearing, snow. Probably the biggest drawback is the cost. They range from $120,000 to $150,000 each, and they're very heavy-duty pieces of equipment. Fairly limited in what they can do. You can purchase additional attachments for them, like mower decks, but they're so heavy that our fear is to put that on the soccer fields would leave like ruts in the soccer fields. So we've even had one brought down and test driven it. It's kind of like a loader where it's articulating, where you steer in the middle. So it's a little bit trickier to steer in tight areas. But basically, when you think of the cost, it's 3 times more. If we can get 7 to 10 years out of these tractors, we're 20, 30 years with these tractors before we would pay for one of these. So that's kind of why we've stuck with the tractors. We do also have like snow blowers that we do have as attachments for these tractors.
Well, the
if
thought
need
I was
be.
going with that as well was the fact that I think they're a lot quicker than plowing, because I've seen, our tractors where they hit a snow bank, they're backing up, going ahead, plowing into it. And,
Yeah.
or this blowers, they could just sort of keep on moving, I guess. But thank you for your response, Ken. It makes sense.
With that, the recommendation is the purchase of 2 John Deere utility tractors, as well as the fleet and equipment reserve be used to fund the purchase. Moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Hammond. All in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Thanks, Ken. Moving on to the LKRC and Hotel Dieu Grace Hospital, the cardiac wellness agreement, and that's you, Mr. Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for having me. The report in front of you is going to ask for council to authorize the mayor and the clerk to enter in a 3-year use of space agreement with Hotel Dieu Grace Healthcare and the municipality. As all of you are probably familiar, the LKRC has the privilege of being the satellite office for the cardiac wellness program. These services are provided to patients who have had a cardiac episode or cardiac illness in an effort to get them back up to shape. It's a 6-month program. It's a fantastic resource for the community, as those who participate in the program don't have to go to Windsor for the program. A little bit of the history. The municipality has not in the past accepted rent payments, rather every 3 years. The Hotel Dieu Grace has purchased a piece of fitness equipment, and that piece of equipment is something that's mutually beneficial to obviously the complex and for the patients as well. Reason being is they do not receive funding for leases, but they do have funding available to purchase equipment for their patients. So, financial impact. Piece of equipment is going to be approximately $6,000. The complex will decide what that piece of equipment is, purchase that, and then the hospital will reimburse us for those fees. Any questions?
Thanks, Terry. Questions, council? Did I say Terry? Sorry, that's because I looked ahead to see who was doing the next report. I saw it said Terry, but I knew it would be you. So I was trying to catch you.
All good.
Moved by Councillor Wilkinson, seconded by Councillor Jacobs. All in favor? And that's carried. Thank you, Jeff.
Excellent.
So Jeff,
Yes.
could you also do the City of Windsor Pathway to Potential?
Yes, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. You are probably also familiar with the Pathway to Potential program. This is a great initiative whose participants are those who meet those low-income cutoff guidelines as set out by Stats Canada. And it's a great way to get folks who can't necessarily afford those programs a way of getting them that funding. How the funding works for Pathway to Potential is they cover 90% of the cost of those approved programs. Those programs aren't necessarily ours. They could be a variety of community groups and minor sports groups, whether it's soccer, baseball, hockey, and a variety of the other groups. Of note, In 2018, the structure of this agreement has expanded, and there has been some significant changes, which gave us a lot of opportunities to provide more opportunities and more universally planned events, like those free skates and those free swims. We also had some family day funding. In short, in 2018, a contract, we were allowed up to $100,000, and we were able to utilize over 88,000 of that. So 88,000 of that went out to the community, which is fantastic. So for this year, for 2019, there has been a base amount allotted of 90,000, and we have been recently advised that they are going to top that up an additional $10,000. And obviously, our continued goal would be to utilize that and get that funding out to the folks who need it. So the recommendation will be to authorize the mayor and clerk to enter into an agreement with Pathway to Potential, the City of Windsor and the municipality. Any questions?
I have one question, if I could.
Yes.
10% of the program cost, that people are lining up for that? Because that, to me, doesn't seem to be at a very substantial discount.
No, they pay 10%, so the discount is 90%.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Well, that's good.
It is, yeah, it is, yeah.
Because quite honestly, I won't go across town for a 10% discount. So
Nor
I
would
wanted to
I.
make sure, well, seriously, I wanted it to be worthwhile for people that
Absolutely.
Did you have a question, Counselor?
And Madam Mayor, if I may, and some of the universal programs themselves are offered free of charge. So
Well,
the
that's
discount
great.
really is, in those instances, is 100%.
Good, that's good. Well, we want it to be advantageous to people that
Absolutely.
are struggling to make bills, and that their
For sure.
children still have opportunities to do what children who come from homes that aren't struggling. To me, I made light of it, but I'm glad that there is that kind of an opportunity for children.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Perfect. With that, moved by Councillor Jacobs, seconded by Councillor Thiessen. All in favor? And that's carried.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jeff. Road resurfacing, Alan, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The purpose of this report is to gain council's approval to award a contract to Shepley Road Maintenance for the 2019 road resurfacing or tar and chip contract. So annually, the municipality completes road maintenance projects that include crack sealing, tar and chip resurfacing, and asphalt milling and paving. The crack sealing contract, though, is a $40,000 budget item that's in our operating budget, not in the capital budget. Earlier this year, the asphalt paving, milling and paving portion of the 2019 road resurfacing program was awarded to Millam Corporation, and it did include the milling and paving of Alderton Street, Benny, Orange, and Worcester in the limits that are shown in the report. That work is now complete. The final cost for the milling and paving work is expected to be below the tender value, and we are expecting savings of just over $50,000 in that contract, but we are recommending that the remaining funds be allocated for the rural road rehabilitation work. So on Friday, July the 5th, we closed tenders. We did receive one for the rural road rehabilitation or tar and chip program, and that was from Shepley Road Maintenance, and it does include for the pulverizing and grading and addition of the addition of a tar and chip surface to Mercy Road 12, Mercy Road 19, and a portion of Mercy Road 1, as shown in figures 1, 2, and 3 of the report. Shepley's tender price, excluding all taxes, is shown in Table 1 of the report. We've analyzed the unit prices and deemed those to be in line with previous years, and we are recommending award of this contract. The post-tendering costs for the rural road rehabilitation are estimated at $481,411, including applicable taxes. This tender, combined with the 2019 milling and paving contract, exceeds the approved overall budget for the 2019 road resurfacing program. However, the 2018 work, which was carried forward into 2019, came in under budget by approximately $194,000. And as a result, the total 2019 spending should remain under budget, and that is explained a little better in Table 2 of the report. Our 2019 annual resurfacing contract, together with the 2018 annual resurfacing contract, is approximately $1,428,000. And now the tendered amount for the 2019 asphalt paving program, which is complete, plus this contract we're talking about tonight for the tar and chip contract at $481,000, plus the work that we carried forward from 2019 is expected to come in now at $1.3 million and a savings of $115,000. So we are recommending that we move ahead with the work and the full contract with Shepley Road Excavating.
Great, thank you, Alan. Did you want to speak to this at all, Councillor Thiessen?
I wasn't going to, but I guess I will. I do want to thank you for coming out to the rural areas. That's great to see some maintenance work being done out there. I do have one other question, though. How many miles of roads do we have in total, and how many years do you plan on spreading? Or what, I guess, what is a normal resurfacing program? Is it 20-year program, 30-year program? Is it as needed? How long does it take to cover all the roads?
We've looked at that number, but it would take 100 years to cover our road network at the amount of money that we're spending on them now. And we have looked at what it might cost to rehabilitate all the roads of the different styles, whether it's asphalt, tar and chip. So each one has its own expected useful life and its own costs. And we've looked at that number. It's quite high as well as an annual expenditure, even if we wanted to do it every 20 years. But to answer your other question, I don't know exactly how many lane kilometers of pavement we have in my head. I do fill that number out once a year, though.
Anyone else? Oh, yes, sorry, Councillor Jacobs.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Alan, just out of curiosity, with the experience we're having in some of these roads currently, I saw today, like where the machinery's getting heavier, the farm equipment's bigger and heavier and so forth. Are we looking at anything in particular other than tar and chipping on these particular roads? I mean, do you look at any potential hazards that could come from development or whatever takes place in those particular areas? And, so we don't have to tear them up and rebuild, I guess.
Yeah, I guess the very short answer is yes. Yes, we are. The longer answer is we have completed some investigative work, and we plan to bring a report to council very shortly to talk about the impact of development on our rural road network, and with some recommendations of how we can go ahead and rehabilitate those roads and get some kind of 20-year useful life out of them. But that report should be in front of council shortly. There are some areas where we don't look at that, where we don't have an intense development program. So we are not looking at changing the style in some areas of town, if that answers your question. The style of road rehabilitation, I should say.
It does. I was just wondering if any of these roads in here that you would anticipate any type of development in that particular area that would affect the roads or the condition of the roads. But you're saying not, that you've looked into that, so that's good enough for me. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
And with that, the recommendation, moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Jacobs, all in favor? And that's carried. Thanks, Alan. Then we have the 2019 biennial bridge condition survey, the RFP results as well, please.
Thank you again, Madam Mayor. The purpose of this report is to gain council's approval to award a contract to Stantec Consulting to complete biennial bridge condition surveys in 2019 and 2021. The municipality does require the engineering services to complete biennial bridge and culvert condition surveys to update the municipality's bridge and culvert inventory, recording current structural conditions and prioritizing rehabilitation needs. The Public Transportation and Highway Improvement Act also requires that all provincial and municipal bridges be inspected every 2 years under the direction of a professional engineer. And that would be a close-up visual assessment of each element of a bridge to identify any material defects, performance deficiencies, and maintenance and rehabilitation needs. The municipality received 5 submissions in response to our request for proposal, and it was advertised on our bids and tenders website. Administration came to a unanimous decision that Stantec Consulting provided the proposal that is most advantageous to the municipality. It's important to note that Stantec has completed the bridge inspection since 2009, and the same staff are proposed to complete the 2019 survey and the 2021 survey. Please note that, again, that the recommendation does include for a survey in 2019 and 2021. For budgeting purposes and efficiencies, we asked the proponents for a proposal and prices to complete the necessary inspections for both 2019 and 2021. Stantec does propose to complete the 2019 survey for just over $20,000 and the 2021 survey for just over $21,000. Thanks.
Thank you, Alan. Questions, Council? Moved by Councillor Wilkinson, seconded by Councillor Thiessen. All in favor? And that's carried. Thanks, Alan. I don't imagine we need to hear more about the Stormwater Master Drainage Study this evening. Moving on to the Ontario Priorities Housing Initiatives. And that is Ms. Laura. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor McDonald. There have been a number of programs enacted by the province to address the need for affordable housing over the years. My report outlines the various programs since 2005 that have been in place and endorsed by Leamington Council. In April 2019, the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing announced a new program under the Ontario Priority Housing Initiatives, referred to as the OPHI. And administration has received correspondence attached to my report from the City of Windsor, who is the city service provider for the program, requesting confirmation of the intent to decline or to participate in the OPHI rental housing program they administer. So to participate in the OPHI rental housing component, a municipality must reduce property taxes for the rental housing project by setting a tax rate equivalent to or lower than the single residential rate, or provide a grant in lieu to have the same effect, and pass a bylaw to enable municipal contributions pursuant to the Municipal Act of 2001. So the OPHI rental housing component of the program may fund a developer up to 75% of the total capital cost per unit on a 20-year forgivable loan basis. Participating landlords are required to maintain rents at 80% or less of the then current mortgage and housing corporation or alternative market rents during the life of the program. So the City of Windsor has issued a request for proposal to provide private sector and non-profit organizations who wish to participate. The RFP submissions were due today. The reduction of property taxes would only come into effect if a developer submitted a proposal for a project within the municipality of Leamington and subsequently council passed a bylaw. Currently, under the 2009 program, there are 2 properties in Leamington that are subject to reduced property taxes. Access to affordable housing is a reality across the province as well as within Leamington. Unfortunately, it's a very common discussion at all levels of government. So as such, it's recommended that Council confirm the municipality's participation in the rental housing component of the Ontario Priorities Housing Initiatives for 2019.
Thank you, Laura. Questions? Councillor Jacobs.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Laura, how effective is this program? Does it encourage the development with the reductions, or do they have any Anything to back this up with?
Through you, Mayor McDonald, I can only speak to the development that's occurred and the opportunities that have been taken in our municipality. We've only had 2 since 2005. There are only 2 properties within our municipality that get a reduced property tax because of their affordable housing and the way that they fit into the program at the time.
Councillor Hammond.
Your worship, thank you. To that point, Laura, I think that given the fact that there was a study that was just put out today, between Windsor and Essex County, there's a 500 home shortage for low-income housing right now, 500 homes. And to your point that maybe we need to make this program more readily available to some contractors or builders that might take advantage of this tax break and the incentive to build some places. So, comments?
Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I guess my issue with this program is that what happens when a developer builds a home and for 20 years he's getting 80% of what the rent should be? Where's the incentive for him to keep up that home, keep up the property properly and in good condition? Will that lead us to more dilapidated housing or housing unsuitable for habitation? I'm not sure if that's the right way to deliver the program. Don't know.
I just wanted to say to Councillor Hammond, there are developers that have been looking. It's always finding the appropriate property and, that's serviced well and so on. So there certainly are ones that are looking. They also have spoken up and told us that they know these are not opportunities for financial gain. They're usually opportunities for doing something good for the municipality or for the community at large. We have passed on the information in the last, I would say, less than 6 months, and we'll continue to do that. And we are looking and put out feelers, hoping more developers will see this as an opportunity to help out in the community. So, be that as it may, at least there is that incentive there when it isn't a huge financial gain circumstance, that this sweetens the pot a little bit. So hopefully we'll get some bites in that regard. So with that recommendation, I'm slowly finding my way to the top. So it's just a matter of council confirming the municipality's participation in the rental housing component of the OPHI for 2019. Moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Hammond. All in favor? And that's carried. Well, this was certainly a productive evening. So we've already done the other matters for approval, so now we're moving on to consideration of bylaws. Thornton.
Bylaw 4619, being a bylaw to amend the comprehensive zoning bylaw number 89009 for the municipality of Leamington, which pertains to the subject lands under Planning Report 1719. Bylaw 4519, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Municipality of Leamington at its meeting held August 15th, 2019. And bylaw 4719, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Municipality of Leamington at its meeting held August 27th, 2019, to be read a first, second, and third and final time.
Moved by Councillor Thiessen, seconded by Councillor Wilkinson. All in favor? And that's carried. Notice of motion, there are none. Open session. Councillor Hammond.
Your worship, thank you. This weekend will mark the grand reopening of our Bank Theater. It's been a long time in coming. I've been serving on the committee for almost 5 years. And for those that haven't had the opportunity to go through and take a look at it, you're going to get that opportunity this coming Thursday night. I think you're going to be impressed by what you see. It's the main floor and the offices are all finished. the downstairs, and it still needs some work, but it's really quite a transition from what it was. So I'm really excited for all of those volunteers who put in thousands of hours of work into this project. So I'm looking forward to seeing you all there this coming Thursday.
Thank you, Counselor. We'll look forward to Thursday evening as well. I just wanted to ask Rob, sidewalk washer, did we not talk about this? And it piqued my interest tonight because Ken Brown was talking about those scraper vehicles. Are we still, did we get one?
Yes, we did. Yes, we talked about a demo for you. I think it was just a matter of
Yes.
picking a date and time.
Okay. Because I'd love to see it work. We were in Cedar Point on the weekend, and I have to say, you could almost eat off their sidewalks. They're very, very clean, and in between you saw them washing, and we certainly have lots of sidewalks that could use a bit of a scrub, so looking forward to that. Okay, with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn, moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Wilkinson. All in favor? And that's carried. Thank you.